My wife's girls' trip was actually a second wedding. I found the photographer's invoice. While filing taxes, I find a hidden $4,000 invoice for a destination wedding package dated during my wife's supposed weekend retreat. Instead of confronting her, I show up at her anniversary dinner with the family and hand her a framed copy of the invoice as her gift. The paper felt heavier than it should have, like the weight of the ink was enough to pull my hand toward the floor. It was just a standard invoice, printed on high-gloss stationery with a small, elegant logo of a palm tree in the corner. But as I sat there in the silence of my home office, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway sounded like a hammer against a nail. I had spent 15 years building a life with Sarah, 15 years of shared coffees, mortgage payments, and the rhythmic comfort of knowing exactly who was sleeping on the other side of the bed. I thought I knew the map of her heart by heart. I didn't realize I had been looking at a forgery. Our life wasn't extraordinary, but it was ours. We lived in a quiet suburb where the trees arched over the street like a green cathedral. Sarah was a landscape architect. She had a way of making things grow where there was only dirt. I worked as a senior accountant for a firm downtown, a job that suited my love for order, for things that balanced, for truths that could be proven with numbers. Every morning followed the same choreography. I'd grind the beans for the coffee, the smell filling the kitchen while the sun hit the yellow tiles. Sarah would come down in her silk robe, her hair a messy halo, and she'd lean against the counter, waiting for her first sip. We talked about the mundane things, the leaking faucet, Maya's upcoming soccer tournament, the dinner party we were planning for her parents' 40th anniversary. "You're so steady, Mark," she'd often say, pressing a cold hand against my cheek. "You're the only thing in this world that never changes." I took it as a compliment. I didn't realize that to her, steady might mean predictable, or perhaps blind. 6 months ago, Sarah told me she needed a soul-recharging weekend. She and 3 of her closest friends, women I'd known for a decade, had booked a villa in Tulum. "Just a girls' trip, honey," she'd said, folding linen sundresses into a suitcase. "No laptops, no kids, just yoga and margaritas. I feel like I'm losing myself in these blueprints." I encouraged it. I even drove her to the airport, kissing her forehead at the terminal. I remember watching her walk away, her gait light, her sun hat swinging in her hand. I spent that weekend taking Maya to the zoo and catching up on yard work, texting Sarah, "I love you," every night. She'd reply with photos of sunsets and plates of tacos. "Wish you were here," she wrote. I believed her. When she came back, she was different. Not in a way you could point to and scream about, but in the way a room feels different when the air conditioning is turned off. The temperature had dropped. She was more attentive enough. She bought me gifts, a high-end watch, a new set of golf clubs, but she stopped looking me in the eye when we spoke. When I'd reach for her hand under the covers, she'd gently pull away, claiming a headache or a long day at the firm. The phone became her shadow. It was never face up on the table anymore. She took calls in the bathroom with the shower running. When I asked who it was, she'd say, "Just a difficult client, Mark. Don't worry about it." I told myself I was being paranoid. I was an accountant. I looked for errors where there were none. I told myself that 15 years earned her the benefit of the doubt, but the silence in our house began to feel heavy. It was the kind of silence that precedes a storm. Tax season is my domain. Every February, I gather our folders, our receipts, and our bank statements. Sarah usually just hands me a shoebox of papers and kisses my head, thanking me for handling the boring stuff. This year, she was late giving me the box. She said she'd lost a few receipts from her business trips. I didn't think much of it until I found a secondary folder tucked into the bottom of her desk drawer when looking for our property tax assessment. It wasn't a business folder. It was a thick, cream-colored envelope. Inside was the invoice. Client, Sarah Miller and Julian Vance. Service, the Eternal Shore Destination Package. Location, Playa del Secreto, Mexico. Date, October 14th. The date of her girls' trip. The total was $4,200. It wasn't just for a hotel, it was for a private ceremony, a floral archway, a commemorative video, and a 3-course dinner for 2 on the beach. There was a line item for a professional photographer, 4-hour wedding session. I stared at the name Julian Vance. I knew that name. He was a contractor she'd worked with on a high-end estate project 2 years ago. I remember meeting him at a Christmas party. He was younger, with restless eyes, and a smile that felt like an invitation. My breath hitched in my throat. I sat on the floor of the office, the glossy paper crinkling in my grip. I didn't cry. I just felt a profound, freezing cold settle into my bones. Everything I thought I knew about my life was a lie. I wasn't a husband. I was a ghost haunting a house that didn't belong to me anymore. The silence that followed the discovery was more deafening than any scream could have been. I sat on that cold office floor for what felt like hours, the cream-colored invoice resting on my knees like a death warrant. I kept reading the name Julian Vance over and over, waiting for it to change, waiting for it to be a typo or a cruel joke. But the math didn't lie. $4,200 for a wedding package on the exact weekend my wife was supposedly drinking margaritas with her college friends. I felt a physical nausea rise in my throat. I thought of the texts she sent me that weekend. "Miss you, babe. The ocean is beautiful, but it's not the same without you." The audacity of it was a poison. It wasn't just a fling. It wasn't a drunken mistake at a hotel bar. She had planned a ceremony. She had bought a dress. She had stood before some officiant and promised her soul to a man who wasn't me, while I was sitting in our living room wearing the sweater she bought me for Christmas, waiting for her to come home. I heard the garage door moan open, the familiar signal that Sarah was back from her site visit. I didn't move. I didn't hide the folder. I just sat there. But as her footsteps approached the door, a cold, sharp clarity washed over me. If I confronted her now, she would cry. She would make excuses. She would tell me it was a symbolic ceremony, or that it didn't mean anything, or that she was confused. She would find a way to make me the villain for snooping. I realized then that I didn't want an apology. An apology is for forgetting to take out the trash. This was a demolition of our entire history. "Mark, are you in here?" She leaned against the doorframe, still wearing her work boots, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. She looked so wholesome, so much like the woman I had loved for 15 years. "Hey," I said, my voice sounding like it was coming from someone else. I slowly slid the folder under a stack of tax forms, my hands steady with a sudden, terrifying resolve. "Just finishing up the deductions. You're home early." "The rain started at the site," she said, walking over and kissing the top of my head. The smell of her perfume, the one I'd bought her, made my skin crawl. "You look tired, honey. Why don't you take a break? We have the big dinner for my parents on Friday. We need you sharp for the son-in-law of the year speech." She laughed, a light melodic sound. I looked at her then, really looked at her, and saw the stranger behind her eyes. "Friday," I repeated. "Right. The anniversary dinner. 40 years, she sighed, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Can you imagine being with someone that long? It's such a beautiful commitment." The irony was a blade in my ribs. I managed to smile, a thin, brittle thing. "It's rare, Sarah. Truly rare." The next 3 days were a masterclass in acting. I went to work. I ate dinner. I tucked Maya into bed and read her stories about brave knights and honest kings, all while a fire burned behind my ribs. I didn't just want to leave. I wanted the truth to be as public as her lie. I waited until Sarah went to her yoga class on Wednesday night. I went back to her desk and found the photographer's name on the invoice, Cielo Weddings. I looked them up online. It didn't take long to find their client gallery section. It was password protected, but the password hint was groom's favorite pet. I remember Julian Vance mentioning his dog at that Christmas party, a golden retriever named Buster. The gallery opened with a soft chime. There she was, my wife. She was wearing a backless lace dress that must have cost a fortune. She was holding a bouquet of white orchids, her hair braided with pearls. She looked radiant. She looked younger. And there was Julian, dressed in a light linen suit, holding her hands. In one photo, they were laughing under a floral arch.
In another, they were cutting a small, tiered cake, but the one that broke me was the shot of them exchanging rings, simple gold bands. She had tucked hers somewhere I couldn't find, but the look of pure, unadulterated devotion on her face was something she hadn't given me in years. I didn't scream. I didn't smash the computer. I felt a strange, clinical detachment. I began to download the photos, every single one. I went to a high-end print shop the next morning. I had the best photo, the one of them kissing at the altar, blown up into a beautiful 11 by 14. I bought an expensive, heavy mahogany frame. I had the shop wrap it in thick silver paper with a massive white bow. I also made copies of the invoice, 4 of them. The dinner for my in-laws was being held at the Gilded Oak, the fanciest restaurant in town. Sarah's parents, her brother and his wife, and even a few close family friends would be there. Sarah had spent weeks organizing it. She wanted everything to be perfect to celebrate her parents' 40 years of honest love. As I sat in the driveway on Friday evening, waiting for Sarah to finish her makeup, I looked at the silver-wrapped box in the passenger seat. My heart was racing, but not with fear. It was the adrenaline of a man who was about to set fire to his own life to keep from freezing to death. "Ready?" Sarah asked, sliding into the car. She was wearing a stunning navy blue cocktail dress. She looked like the perfect wife. "Ready?" I said, putting the car in gear. "I have a special gift for the occasion. I think it's going to be the highlight of the evening." "Oh, Mark," she beamed, touching my arm. "You're always so thoughtful. What is it?" "You'll see," I said, my voice low and calm. "It's a reflection of everything we've built together."
The drive to the Gilded Oak was a blur of streetlights and artificial conversation. Sarah was buzzing with nervous energy, checking her reflection in the sun visor and talking about the floral arrangement she'd picked for her parents' table. 40 years, Mark, she said, her voice soft with what I now knew was practiced sentiment. That kind of loyalty is so rare these days. I hope we're sitting at a table just like this in 25 years. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Loyalty, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. It's a choice, isn't it? A choice you make every single day. Exactly, she whispered, patting my hand. Her touch felt like a physical burn. When we arrived, the private dining room was already glowing with candlelight. Her parents, Arthur and Elaine, were the picture of dignified aging. Arthur in a sharp suit, Elaine in her favorite pearls. Her brother, David, was already on his second scotch, laughing at a joke. These were people I had loved for over a decade, people I considered my own blood. The dinner was a parade of fine wine and exquisite courses, but I couldn't taste a thing. I sat there, the steady husband, nodding in the right places, while the silver-wrapped box sat on a side table like a live grenade. "And now," Arthur said, standing up and clinking his glass as dessert was served, "I want to thank my beautiful daughter for organizing this. Sarah, you've always had a heart for family. And Mark, thank you for being the rock she leans on. You two are the blueprint for what a marriage should be." There was a round of hears and applause. Sarah beamed, leaning her head on my shoulder, her eyes damp with performative emotion. "Actually," I said, standing up, my chair scraped against the hardwood floor, a harsh sound in the refined room. "I have something I'd like to present, in the spirit of celebrating commitments." Sarah looked up at me, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "Mark, the big gift was for later, remember?" "No," I said, my voice eerily calm. "It's the perfect timing. After all, we're talking about the beauty of a wedding, aren't we?" I walked over to the side table and picked up the heavy silver-wrapped box. The room went quiet. I could feel every eye on me. I placed the box directly in front of Sarah, right next to her half-eaten creme brulee. "Go ahead, Sarah. Open it. It's a tribute to a weekend I know you'll never forget." Sarah laughed nervously, glancing at her parents. "Mark, you're being so mysterious. Is this a joke?" "No joke," I said. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tucked them under the silver ribbon. She pulled it loose, the silk fluttering to the white tablecloth. She tore the paper slowly, revealing the heavy mahogany frame.
When the image finally came to view, the color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. It was the high-resolution shot of her and Julian Vance, their foreheads pressed together under that tropical archway, the Mexican sun casting a golden glow over her lace dress. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. "What is this?" Arthur asked, leaning forward, squinting through his bifocals. "Sarah, is that a costume party?" Sarah didn't speak. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. Her eyes were locked on the photo, her breathing becoming shallow and ragged. "It's not a costume, Arthur," I said, my voice projecting to the back of the room. "That's Sarah's second wedding. It took place last October in Tulum. You remember, the weekend she was supposedly with her girlfriends? It turns out she wasn't just soul-searching, she was soul-sharing with Julian Vance." I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out the folded copies of the invoice. I laid one in front of her father, one in front of her mother, and one in front of her brother. $4,200, I noted, pointing to the line items. The Eternal Shore package includes a private chef, a professional photographer, and a commemorative video. "I haven't seen the video yet, Sarah. Is it as beautiful as this dinner?" Elaine let out a sharp, choked gasp as she looked at the invoice. David stood up, his face reddening with anger. "Sarah, what the hell is this?" Sarah finally looked up at me. The mask of the perfect wife hadn't just slipped, it had shattered. Her eyes were wide with a mix of terror and a sudden sharp hatred. "Mark, how could you do this here, in front of my parents?" "How could you do that there?" I countered, pointing to the photo. "In front of God and a $300 an hour photographer. You stood in our kitchen and told me I was the only thing that never changes. You were right. My love for you didn't change, but yours turned into a transaction."
The restaurant, which had felt so warm and inviting moments ago, suddenly felt like an interrogation room. The clinking of silverware in the main dining hall seemed miles away. In our table, the only sound was the heavy, ragged breathing of my wife. "Sarah?" Arthur's voice was barely a whisper. He was looking at the photo, then at the invoice, then back at his daughter. His hand, the one that had held a celebratory glass of champagne just minutes ago, was shaking. "Tell me this is some kind of sick joke. Tell me he's just upset about something and making this up." Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. She looked like a trapped animal, her eyes darting from her father to the door, then finally settling on me. The tears started then. Not the soft, romantic tears she'd shed during the toasts, but hard, angry streaks that ruined her expensive makeup. "You followed me?" she spat, the venom in her voice startling even her mother. "You went through my things? You spied on me?" "I didn't have to spy, Sarah," I said, my voice remaining steady, a stark contrast to her rising hysteria. "I was doing our taxes. I was trying to build our future, while you were busy auditing our past to see what you could steal from it. You used the money we saved for Maya's college fund to buy a wedding to a man who isn't your husband. It wasn't a real wedding," she shrieked, finally finding her voice. She stood up, her chair clattering backward. It was a ceremony, a commitment ceremony. Julian and we have a connection you wouldn't understand. You're so cold, Mark, so clinical. You treat our marriage like a ledger." "And you treated it like a tax write-off," I countered. Elaine buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. "On our anniversary, Sarah? You let him do this today?" "I didn't let him do anything, Mom." She turned on her mother, her desperation turning into a blind strike. "Mark chose to ruin this. He could have talked to me in private. He wanted to humiliate me." "No," I said, stepping closer to the table. "I wanted the people who raised you to see exactly who they raised. I wanted the people who toasted to loyalty to see what your version of loyalty looks like. You stood on that beach and promised yourself to someone else. In my world, Sarah, that's not a connection. That's a divorce."
David, Sarah's brother, stood up and grabbed the invoice from the table, scanning it with a look of pure disgust. He looked at me, then at his sister. "I stayed at your house that weekend, Sarah. I watched Maya so Mark could get some work done. You told me you were at a spa retreat. You lied to me, too." "Everyone leave," Sarah said, her voice dropping into a low, dangerous tone. "Everyone just get out." "Gladly," I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my wedding ring, the gold band that had felt like a part of my skin for 15 years. I placed it on top of the framed photograph, right over Julian Vance's smiling face. "I think Julian might want to buy you a matching set, since he's so good at connecting." I turned to Arthur and Elaine. "I'm sorry for the timing. You deserved a better night, but I think you deserved the truth more." I walked out of the Gilded Oak without looking back. The night air was crisp, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could actually fill my lungs with oxygen. The weight of the suspicion, the crushing burden of the lie, it was all gone. It had been replaced by a hollow ache. Yes, but a hollow space can be filled. A space occupied by a lie can only rot. The months that followed were a blur of legal meetings and quiet evenings. Sarah tried to fight for the house, tried to claim emotional distress, but the evidence I'd gathered was ironclad. In our state, marital waste, spending joint funds on an affair, is taken very seriously. She moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. Julian Vance, it turns out, wasn't quite as interested in the eternal shore when it didn't come with a landscaped backyard and a husband paying the credit card bills. They lasted 3 months before he moved on to his next connection. I kept the house. I kept the dog. Most importantly, I kept the trust of my daughter. Maya is older now. She's starting to understand why her mother and I aren't together. We don't talk about that night at the restaurant. We talk about the future. I've learned that being steady isn't a weakness, it's a foundation, and you can't build a home on a foundation of sand and secrets. Sometimes I sit in my office, the same one where I found that cream-colored envelope, and I look at the garden Sarah designed. It's still beautiful, the flowers still bloom, but I'm the one who weeds it now. I'm the one who makes sure the roots are healthy. I realize that forgiveness isn't about letting the other person off the hook. It's about taking the hook out of your own heart. I don't hate Sarah anymore. I don't have the energy for it. I just feel a quiet, distant pity for someone who had everything and thought she needed a package to feel alive. I'm moving forward, one day at a time, one honest breath at a time. They say that love is blind, but I think betrayal is what truly blinds us. It makes us close our eyes to the truth because the truth is too loud to hear. Looking back, I don't regret the way I did it. Some people say I was cruel to do it in front of her family. Maybe I was, but when someone burns down your house while you're sleeping inside, you don't owe them a polite conversation about the fire. I chose to stand in the light. Tell me in the comments, would you have waited for a private moment or would you have handed her the truth in front of everyone? Have you ever found a secret that changed your life in a single second? If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing. Here at Rabbit Tales, we believe every story deserves to be told and every truth deserves to be heard. Until next time, take care of your heart and each other.